One of my many areas of interest is early Christian culture and society and thought. And this next book is one of those in that vein. It's actually by Wayne A. Meeks. Meeks is get his exact title right. He's the Woolsey Professor of Biblical Studies at Yale. And this is I thought this was a pretty impressive book. Um, it's called The Origins of Christian Morality, the First 2 Centuries. Constructing the moralities and ethical sensibilities of people is always pretty difficult, especially when you're at a remove of about 20 centuries. Yet this is what Wayne Meeks tries to do in this book. Some of the things Meeks looks at won't surprise people, but the depth and breadth of the readings that he brings to the conversation is pretty striking. He discusses conversion and how it always emphasized, at least in the first 2 centuries of Christian experience, both the personal and the communal, the breaking away from a wider community and joining a more select one. And he looks at some of the conversion stories like Justin Martyr's dialogue with Trypho as a way of trying to concretize this change of a primary reference group. By emphasizing the world from which they turned, new Christians, mostly Jews early on, but later Gentiles too, also served to provide exhortatory stories of the morality of the new group itself. Another common topic in early Christian morality is whether we should come to love or hate the world. And by looking at a lot of texts, including Gnostic ones, Pauline ones, Johannine texts, he shows how they all give different advice about how connected we should be to the world, whether we should embrace it or ignore it. In John, for example, the goal was not what Meeks calls philosophical high-mindedness, but the cultivation of a, quote, passionate, sectarian, practical love that binds members to the group exclusively to one another and to the God they believe in. Gnostics, on the other hand, were often accused of being ascetics who hated the world because of the way they wanted to escape the creation of the demiurge. Meeks includes a pretty interesting section on the specific language of Christian obligation and how those languages took certain specific literary forms. Christian moral practice took a number of shapes, some of which were quite simply lists of do's and don'ts, some of which included nomes, which is from the word nomia in Greek, or sententiae in Latin, which were just collected aphorisms or witty maxims. Still others were moral imperatives, like precepts and commands, or discussions of certain topics and commonplaces, like, you get sort of these Latin titles like On Friendship or On the Family. Meeks composes, in this book, I think, a grammar of moral obligation through these forms and how they're connected with some of the schools of Hellenistic philosophy. He goes on to discuss similar topics in the following chapters, including the body as sign and problem, a life worthy of God, senses of an ending, the moral story, and history, pluralism, and Christian morality. I took a lot away from the book because obviously Meeks is quite a scholar, and I'd recommend this for anyone who's interested in the first couple of centuries, as the title tells you, of the development of Christian ethics, and especially with an emphasis on the development of moral communities. It's a scholarly book, but I'm a passionate amateur. I didn't really find it difficult to follow or to understand. There's a lot of reference material in the back that if you're interested you can follow up with even more scholarly sources but the book doesn't read like a journal article or anything. And it's also got no hint of an agenda that it's trying to push, like some other more popular books might have. And as you might be able to tell from my discussion, Meeks arranges his book topically, making use of the appropriate texts as he goes along. So he really writes in the best of ethnographic traditions with a really thorough, rigorous knowledge of the material and an objective, concerted effort to better understand his ancient subjects. I actually, after having finished this, I went out and bought another one of Meeks' books called The First Urban Christians, and I'll probably be posting a review of that sometime in the near or not too near future, depending on how I get around to it. The Origins of Christian Morality, The First 2 Centuries, by Wayne A. Meeks.